Cincinnati. It's the Skyline Chili Crosstown Shootout at the Cintas Center. Oh boy, is this going to be fun.
This is the war that you dreamt about. No other war. This one right here. Let's go. This is our war.
Good and underneath the dunk by Jones. They blew it. The deep three. Marshall had his hands up right away. 89-76. They've now won 8 of 11 Crosstown Shootouts.
In Cincinnati, Ohio, with a population of just over 300,000, there is one weekend a year that is unlike any other, where camping takes place, and the folks come out in droves for a rivalry that stands in a class of its own.
Maybe the best day of my year, honestly. I'm so lucky to be able to broadcast this rivalry. It is the best intra-city rivalry in college basketball.
Intensity, that's what college basketball is all about.
Familiarity. They didn't like us, we didn't like them.
It's really important to the fabric of our community. It's one of the main sporting events of the year. Buckle up, it's going to be intense. Maybe there's a big shot and one of those magical moments that you know it's going to end up getting talked about for the next 50 years.
I don't know that you can put a finger on it or define it in a perfect way. I think there's just a familiarity between the players. When you're growing up and you start going to the playground and you play against all of your buddies and you want to flex that you're a better player or that you have the better team.
Everywhere you went, people picked a side.
That proximity is a big factor into the way that you approach that game. And you can feel it from the fans, you can feel it from the players. I think there's just always a measuring stick to your rival, and you want to have a better recruiting class, you want to have a better coach, you want to have a better scheme. And in that one game you get to play your rival every year, you don't want to just beat them, you want to embarrass them. It is the one game that you star, year in and year out.
When I got on campus, the first question was, are you guys going to beat UC? Not, you gonna go to the NCAA tournament, or you gonna win a league championship? Are you gonna beat UC? That's what it was about. My heart beats a little bit quicker before the game, and I want to win that game so bad.
It's exactly what you would want from two schools that are rivals that are just 3 miles apart. Bragging rights are on the line, and it means so much to the schools. There's a certain fervor that goes with it that you don't see in other rivalry games.
I can't wait to that date every year. It is an unbelievably electric atmosphere every single time.
I had covered a couple of Texas-Oklahoma football games. That's what it initially reminded me of. I'm back watching Texas OU again.
And these fan bases are really what drive this rivalry. The players don't show up at Cincinnati and Xavier despising each other. They are taught to have that good-natured dislike. That's really what separates this rivalry from all the other great rivalries in college basketball.
This is a rivalry that's had intensity going back for decades. It goes back for a long time.
The central figures in this rivalry are known because of what they've done on the court. Lenny Brown, Danny Fortson, Trayvon Blewett.
In the 1960s, you had a Xavier player getting knocked out of bounds, grabbing a fan's crutch, throwing it at a UC player. In the 70s, you had the UC coach becoming the Xavier coach. In the 80s, you had two players going down the court, and the UC player thought he was getting elbowed and ended up punching the Xavier player and knocking him down.
Joe Stiffin's shot at the buzzer to beat Xavier back in the day.
And then in the 90s, of course, you have the ill-fated non-handshake when Pete Gillen and Bob Huggins met at midcourt, and Huggins wouldn't shake Pete's hand.
The first Crosstown Shootout I ever did was the Lenny Brown game.
It was just 1 or 2 games into the season, and they were playing #1 Cincinnati at Cincinnati.
They were rolling under Bob Huggins. Obviously, they were #1 in the country early that season.
Xavier had a guard named Lenny Brown. Single digits on the clock. Xavier gets the ball half court. Brown just dribbles a few times, turns around, heads to the basket, kind of launches a little floater.
Lenny Brown's shot gives Xavier the win. Andy McWilliams has the tremendous call.
The UC Bearcats are #1 in the country, #2 in their own city.
Which is one of the great play-by-play lines of all time. A few years later, Xavier did it again and beat Cincinnati when the Bearcats were #1 in the country. So that Lenny Brown moment was very big for this rivalry.
Now, I remember vividly a guy for Xavier by the name of Kevin Fry, and that Xavier-led team was playing against a top-ranked UC team, and I just remembered the energy, you know, moving from the TV screen into my living room and seeing Xavier get that win.
It is wonderful for this city to have 2 top college basketball teams and to have 2 go into the NCAA tournament and 2 have a chance to go to the Sweet 16. I mean, that is very exciting for Cincinnati.
Just being from the city, you know, you always heard, hey, it means more to Xavier. It always means more to those guys. You know, I always played that up with our guys. You know, if it means more to us, and that's what they think, let's play like it. You know, let's make sure we're the more aggressive team. Let's make sure we're the team that is desperate to get that win.
Coming up, Mick and Mack.
A lot of the head coaches involved in the rivalry have been despised by the other fan base.
Mick Cronin is the coach that Xavier fans love to hate.
Mick Cronin is from Cincinnati. The head coach for Xavier, Chris Mack, is from Cincinnati. They played against each other in high school.
When you're talking about Mick in this situation, I don't think you cannot talk about Mack as well, because that fueled the rivalry even more. Hometown guys playing at their alma maters.
2 local guys that have deep-rooted connections to this area, and probably 2 guys that don't care for each other very much, if we're being honest. You know, but we knew as a team how much that game meant to Chris Mack.
Did they dislike each other?
I don't think so. I don't think they're going to have family dinner together on a Sunday night, but you know, I think they're okay with each other.
I like Mick. You know, see, I have a history of Mick. You know, Mick and I, you know, we sort of grew up together. So we were in the same station wagons. We were in the same carpools to games. I mean, we played every weekend in different tournaments around the city. There's a lot of respect for Mick. I know a lot of people don't like him on Xavier's side. He's obviously a terrific coach. He does a little differently than I do, but a lot of people do.
Chris is, you know, he's going to beat you down. I mean, that's just what Chris is.
His focus was on toughness, and that's something Chris had to learn, you know, with 2 knee injuries and, you know, kind of his own playing career here, and then he got into the coaching ranks, and to Xavier, he brought that competitiveness, that fire, and you could see it in his teams.
I love Mick Cronin. I know he's not the best loser, so you kind of had the sense that, you know, there was the potential for maybe something in that regard reaching a tipping point.
Xavier fans could not stand Mick Cronin. And I'm sure the UC fans didn't like Chris Mack, because they both had an edge to them. Why the game got as brutally competitive as it did. Both of those guys wanted to win as much as possible.
You finally kind of got the ultimate combination of coaches with the 2 hometown coaches from their alma maters, which I don't know that you could do better than that in terms of stoking this rivalry. That is when it, you know, it got to a pinnacle.
There was an interview that week of that game that rubbed people the wrong way.
I remember there was a radio spot that Sean Kilpatrick had with Andy Furman, and Andy put him on the spot and said, "Would 2 Holloway start on your team?" And Sean said, "No."
Sean was on a good team that had gone to the NCAA tournament the year before. He's talking his teammates up. He's doing what a leader should do. Of course he's going to say that a guy on the team that's our biggest rival couldn't play for us. And I would imagine that had it been 2 Holloway or Mark Lyons or anybody on Xavier's team, if you would have asked him to speak honestly and asked him the same question, they would have said the exact same thing about Sean Kilpatrick.
I think we all heard the commentary from Kilpatrick saying that, you know, to a guy like 2 Holloway may not have been the smartest move.
We would always tutor our guys early on As soon as that last game was played before the shootout, just talk to our guys about not giving UC any ammunition. Don't talk in the papers, don't make predictions. Let's make sure our talking is done on the floor. I was glad that two at the time was smart enough not to say a word. You know, he's being challenged publicly. You can bet that thing was taped up in our locker room.
In a game where no extra motivation is needed, that was adding gasoline to the fire.
We knew that Two had heard it, and I knew that he was going to take it personally. Two was, not only our best player, but he was our leader.
That getting out was lots of motivation for Two Holloway and for Xavier. The team had a lot of big personalities on it, and I think things just spilled over in a way that no one could have ever expected.
Coming up, a rivalry-changing brawl.
A high-intensity game made more so by some jawing between Octavius Ellis and Mark Lyons heading into halftime.
Our guys backed up the talk, and once we backed up the talk, it just kind of elevated that moment.
It was getting pretty tense. Boy, I hope the officials get this under control, because this is starting to get kind of sketchy, and unfortunately that's exactly the way it played out.
It was just like the powder keg exploding.
I think we were up 20 or 25 at that point. So we were obviously, the game at that point was pretty much going our way.
We whipped their ass. We dominated that game from the beginning to the end. At the end of it, we had scored a bucket and Two came down and sort of said something to the bench. I should have probably gotten the team, off the floor in terms of getting the starters off the floor. But I didn't want to bring those guys off the floor simply because you bring them off the floor, they walk slowly, the fans cheer. It's almost like a celebration. I always feel like that's a little salt in the wound for the other team.
Of course, it was that skirmish between Geelong Gwyn and Two Holloway, and then Des Wells pushing away Geelong Gwyn, and then that led to all the fighting.
It became a little bit of chaos at that point, for sure. And all of a sudden, you had everybody on the court, you had fans going crazy, you had fists flying. Really, all the guys were just trying to protect their teammates. Coaches were trying to get guys, and it was a blur for everybody involved. It was just insane and unexpected, and your adrenaline is just on 100. But that moment there was one I'll never forget.
It was just a little spark that just led to a fire of craziness that happened so quick that I didn't realize what had happened until, I saw Kenny Freeze leaving with a bloody eye and realized that he had got punched in the face, and it was just bedlam and pandemonium.
Yancey Gates, local kid. He comes to Cincinnati. The expectations were enormous. One of the best players on a Sweet 16 team, and he did it under a microscope. He got booed at times. Kenny and Yancey, the year before, the game was at UC, and they had a moment. I think there was a headbutt involved. So those two guys had a history.
Certainly never expected multiple players involved, people trying to kick other people, a punch that bloodied somebody's face and bruised his eye.
Kenny was a tough kid, and he wasn't going to back down. I think after he got sucker punched, he's not going to walk in the tunnel and go see the trainer, and he's going to stand there and fight and probably give it back in terms of talk. It was a tough moment for everybody, tough moment for Kenny. I'm glad there wasn't any permanent damage, obviously, to his eye, which was a concern at the time.
The prequel, if you will, to the fight was Yancey versus Kenny. None of us knew at the time that was going to set the stage for something as long-lasting as it did.
If my players don't act the right way, they will never play another game at Cincinnati. Right now, I just told my guys, I will decide. I'll meet with my AD and my president, and I'm going to decide who's on the team going forward. That's what the University of Cincinnati's about, period. I told them the way I feel. I've never been this embarrassed. I'm hoping President Williams doesn't ask me to resign after that. I made everybody take their jersey off, and they will not put it on again until they have a full understanding of where they go to school and what the university stands for and how lucky they are to even be there. They're all sitting in there with no jersey on. Some of them I physically took them off.
Mick's behavior immediately after that specific game was one of his best moments, if not his very best moment off the court. When you speak immediately, off the cuff, those are your real emotions. You don't have the ability to cobble together some sort of PR type statement that you're trying to make yourself or your team look good. He spoke from the heart, and I thought that he handled that beautifully.
When Mick left the room, some of them gave him a standing ovation, which is not something you do if you're part of the media. You don't, that doesn't happen.
I know there were a couple of players like standing right next to me on the table looking up, you know, we're great. The way that the Xavier kids handled it was a little off-putting. I mean, I understand that they're kids. It was a very emotional game, an incredibly emotional moment to end it. UC won the press war, for what that's worth.
Xavier won the game.
That's right.
Coming up, how the Crosstown Shootout has survived and thrived.
Years ago, it was an ugly moment. It was a low point in the rivalry, but you don't shut down something that's got so much history just for that. I don't think it's fair to pinpoint that to any one person or even two people. I think it's, you know, it was a sequence of events and a sequence of incidents that happened over time. There probably were some people saying we should take a break, but boy, that would be a really big thing to do.
For us as a team, it did hurt us initially. Eventually, at the end of the year, we had a good run in the NCAA tournament to finish that year. It ended up bringing us all together closer.
That could have been the signature moment for both of those school seasons. And as it turned out, both schools made it to the Sweet 16 on the exact same day.
You hope that it should never get to that point, but you know, these kids are human. They're young. I mean, they're kids. They're 6'8", but they're still kids, and they're still trying to manage their emotions. And to me, I was like, well, that's the Xavier UC rivalry. Someone always gets punched, someone always gets elbowed, there's always some aggression, and this just happened in front of a national audience. And as a result, I think there was an overreaction, like, oh, let's stop the game, let's play the game at a neutral court.
What was the vibe like at US Bank Arena when this is moved off of a campus?
Yeah, I thought it was strange. I really did. It just didn't have the same feel.
I mean, that only hurt the fans. I mean, the players still have the same intensity, whether you play the game outside in the park or on UC's campus or out here in the Cincinnati Center, the intensity is going to be the same.
Well, I hope it goes on forever, and I hope it's not always civil. You know, I'm sure the schools and the leagues wouldn't share that, but, you know, it's a little of that World Wrestling Federation, right? You have to have a little of that tension and those interesting storylines. No, I don't want that incident from 10 years ago to repeat. Of course not. I don't want anybody hurt, but I do love the intensity of the game. I do love the game when everyone's super hyped for it. I like when it's talked about, and I like when it's a big event in the city. I think it's good for the city.
When these two teams come together, the entire city just stops for 2.5 hours. All eyes are on this court, and it means so much. And I don't know if it's like that in any other city in which they have two great programs only 3 miles apart. And that's the special thing.
It continues to be, you know, one of the longest and best rivalries in college basketball.
You know, it should be emotional. It should be energy charged, and fans should get into it. But as long as it doesn't spill over into anything more than a basketball game, then that's my desire for it. You know, I think there's a lot of people around the country that tune into that. And you want to represent, you know, both schools want to represent themselves at a really high level in basketball. You know, Trav's doing a great job at Xavier. I think the rivalry's in great hands.
It was a game on the schedule for sure. When you come here, you want to be a part of it, and you don't just want to be a part of it, you want to be a big piece of it and play your best game.
If we didn't have it, there would be a huge void. There would be a huge gap. And fans of both schools like to say, oh, the game's not that big of a deal. Anybody who says that is lying.
But the rivalry is always great, and if the two teams take a brief dip, it's only going to be a year or two before one or both are back near the top of the country. I have no doubt that Cincinnati and Xavier are going to thrive in the immediate future, and with the Bearcats going to the Big 12 sometime in the very near future, they have a chance to really elevate their program to maybe heights we've never seen it before.
I mean, there's no reason to believe that it won't go on as it always has. I mean, both schools have been in multiple conferences over the years. Nothing's ever changed about this rivalry. So no, I don't see it ending anytime soon.
This rivalry is really something that does belong to the city, and it's not these two schools just playing each other. It means more than that. I think it's a game people look forward to, and I think that if it can survive the brawl, the suspensions, the move to the neutral site, I think it can survive anything.
It's better when we play this game. And look, there have been people involved who don't want to play it. There have been some coaches who, if they're being honest, they don't want to play it. But this is a fans game. And if the game were to come off the schedule, that's who's being deprived of something. I get why the coaches don't love it, and there's a bigness to it. But come on, man. Can you imagine the college basketball season without Cincinnati and Xavier playing? Come on.